on TB for about the last 6 years, doing research into what TB is and how TB is made. I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes today, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So I always think that's the best part of a seminar like this. So just as a quick structure, I'm going to go through what is TB. I know that lots of you already know this, but hopefully I might provide a bit of a challenge to what some of you think TB is, and might be able to expand what lots of us think TB is more generally. I'm then going to talk through my research gap that I explored and why I think this matters. For the academics in the room, I'm then going to talk you through my methodology. And then I did a multi-sited ethnography. So basically I worked across lots of different sites with lots of different people looking at what TB is. Now, I can't go through all my findings. So today I'm just going to focus on 2 practices, and that is badger culling and a citizen science project that I worked on in the Edge area, for those of you who know TB. And so I'll talk you through kind of my findings from those 2 sites. I'll then just update you all on kind of what's next for this research and for me, and also why this matters. Now, for any of you that might be a little bit squeamish, hopefully not many of you, but there is an image of a dead animal in here. I'll warn you when it comes up if any of you don't want to see it. So, what is TB? Well, it really does depend on who you ask. To many scientists, TB is an endemic livestock disease caused by Mycobacterium bovis. That's commonly how it's known. To others, it's a controversy. It's a controversy that's been alive since about the 1970s, when a badger was first discovered with TB. And it's a continued conflict into the present day, largely driven by badger culling. And this conflict roughly includes farmers, vets, wildlife groups, the government, and mainly this is around badger culling, but for some farmers, this is also about TB management more generally. Now, hopefully many of you already know that badgers are a carrier of TB, and they're also a protected species, and so they require a license to be killed. And that's where some of this controversy arises from. We'll go over this in more detail a bit later. Now, to many farmers and vets, TB is the constant testing of cattle for the disease, and then the slaughter of these animals if they're reactors to the test. It's the shutting down of farm businesses when they get reactor cattle. It's the loss of trade to farmers, and it's the loss of identity of being a farmer. To some farmers, it's, TB is their friend's suicide, which has been caused by being shut down with TB and feeling absolutely hopeless about what to do. To some badgers and wildlife groups, TB is it's the unjust slaughter of badgers. As I said already, government has licensed the culling of badgers since 2011, 2012. And some badger groups have got strongly feel that this is incorrect and unjust. To some policymakers, TB is the aim for eradication. We have an obligation in this country, or we did whilst we were with the EU, to aim for eradication. And so this map here shows some of the disease management. This is kind of a portrayal of the disease management strategies that take place across the country. And to the press, TB is the direct interaction of cattle and badgers. And this image is often used when TB is reported on in the press. And actually, this is a fake image. These are stuffed badgers that have been put next to live cattle. So here, TB is something that very, very, very rarely happens on the farm. So what I'm trying to get across here is that what TB is depends on who you are and what disease management practices you're involved with. So whether it's framed by disease testing for many farms and vets, whether it's framed by badger culling, control measures, whether it's framed by the press. So these different practices of disease management shape what TB is. not just how we think of TB, but actually what TB is to these different people. But this variability of what TB is isn't widely investigated or even acknowledged. Now, much policy and research has an essentialist notion of what TB is. And by this, I mean that TB is seen as something that's fixed and something singular. And this has to be the notion of what TB is, because if we're going to control it, we have to know what it is, we have to be able to detect it, and we have to be able to manage it. So this position is absolutely vital for scientists and for policy to be able to control the disease and to aim for eradication. And what it means is that there's a world out there that we can detect and that we can know about. One of the consequences of this position is that it leads to the notion that controversy is caused by multiple interpretations of this fixed disease. And this position, what it does is it occludes the variability of the disease that I've just outlined. So all those different things of what the disease is not really seen. Rather, they're seen as different interpretations of what the disease is. And therefore, controversy is due to disagreements over science about how we know the disease. Now, my research challenges this. I looked at how TB is made in practice so that we can really get to grips with what these different versions of TB are and how the controversy arises through these different versions of TB. So I've investigated the heterogeneity of the disease and how this is made in practice. Now, whilst the issue of TB has attracted considerable social science attention, I know some of you are on the call who have done a lot of work on TB. What there is a very big lack of research into the practices of disease management, and all of you will probably know that there's a particular gap around badger culling. Now, the big empirical gap around how the cull policy is enacted on the ground has big implications for understandings of what the policy is and what the controversy is. So I went out into the field to have a look at this. So I had a look at how practices shape TB. Now, I know that this might sound kind of worrying to many of us, that there isn't, in my opinion, there isn't one version of TB that can be known. But actually, I find it really positive and an optimistic view on TB, because it means that there are different ways that we can do TB. If TB is shaped through practice, then that means that by changing some of the practices, we might be able to change what TB is and some of this controversy. And so the controversies are known. Controversies are public debates, often about science and how we know things. And therefore, controversies are generative. They give up other ways of doing science, they give up other ways of doing disease, of different futures. And so I think that this can be a really positive thing, that we can look into how TB can be done differently. So as I said earlier, I did this through an ethnography. So an ethnography is where you go out into the field, and my research involved a lot of participant observations. So I was being with lots of these people involved in TB practices on the ground. And I defamiliarized the disease. So I didn't assume that it was this mycobacteria that we could detect, but rather I went in kind of afresh and looked at how TB is for all of these different settings. And my ethnography was somewhat unique in that I managed to work across the multiple sites and the multiple sides of the TB controversy. So I followed disease, and through doing that, I worked with farmers, with vets, with people protesting against various policies, people undertaking direct action against policies. And so what I've been able to do is have a look more broadly at the TB controversy rather than just from one particular opinion. I worked across 6 practices, across 3 main sites. My sites were framed by that map on the first slide, so the edge area, the high risk area and the low risk area. And for example, I went out I had 3 months, 3 months with farmers and vets doing skin tests on farm. I had 3 months in a cull zone working with both contractors shooting and with people sabotaging the cull. I had 3 months on a citizen science study looking at TB prevalence in badgers. So overall, I had about 9 months of full-time research. And as Angela Cassidy notes, by studying the controversy, I was also part of the controversy. So I'm not neutral here. I am part of the controversy. My work matters to the controversy, it contributes to it, and it's part of it. I mainly undertook participant observation, but this was supplemented with interviews and focus groups. And I'm going to talk you through a lot of this kind of first-hand research through these slides. I have used other names throughout these slides, so everything's confidential. I'm also happy to have a chat with anyone afterwards if you are intrigued about how I did this, how I managed to work with different groups, oppositional groups in a controversy. Then I'm very happy to talk about that later on. So as I said, I'm going to focus on badger culling and on citizen science for the rest of this talk. So first up, badger culling. So the question is, should badgers be culled to control the spread of Mycobacterium bovis in cattle? And this was first asked about in the 1970s and has been a debate ever since. There's been lots of different scientific trials and policies related to badger culling, the most recent of which was instigated in 2012. And culling's being undertaken through controlled shooting and cage trapping and shooting. And as I said, there's strong opposition in the field and online to this policy. So badgers are presented as a significant wildlife reservoir for TB, and badger culling is rationalised as a measure to manage the likelihood of badger to cattle infection. And the policy overall is underpinned by was underpinned by pre-cull badger population counts. So there's been various different changes to the methods of counting badger populations. When I was doing my fieldwork, the method at the time was going out and doing set surveys to have a look at how many badgers live in the area, and then to try and set a target of killing 70% of them. And the 70% target is what the effectiveness of the policy is judged against. So the policy is deemed effective if it hits the 70% cull target. Now, there are lots of difficulties of measuring badgers, the badger population, and they live underground, they're nocturnal, they rarely interact with humans. This posed massive challenges to the government and to the people undertaking the policy on the ground. So how it was done at the time is, I'm just going to walk you through this diagram here. It's quite complicated. So culling 70% of the badger population is achieved by contractors under licence. So first of all, the licence, if areas meet certain criteria, a licence is given out to them. Then the badger population is estimated for that area and shooting begins to try and kill 70%. Now, because of the difficulty of measuring the 70% estimate, because of the inaccuracies of that, population estimates are revised mid-cull based on kill rates. So the effort that contractors put in and how many badgers they kill influences the population estimate overall. Then the number of badgers culled determines the policy effectiveness, and an effective policy continues. So we go around the cycle again. Now, I'm just going to read out this quote in the middle here, which is by Rosie Woodworth, who's a badger ecologist working on TB. And she says, where few badgers were being killed, they lowered the targets. Where a lot were killed, they raised them. Culling that was consistently ineffective would look like a low badger density and prompt a reduced target. So what matters here is that these calculations that take place all around this cycle determine the effectiveness of the policy, and an effective policy can continue. So if we're going to try and understand badger culling, we need to go out into the field to see how this is happening, the shooting, to see how the revision is happening. The practices of shooting badgers are vital, both for the enactment of the policy, for the policy to exist in the first place, and also to sustain the policy. The policy won't continue unless enough badgers are killed. So we need to understand killing, the act of killing badgers, to really understand this policy. So here's an extract on screen. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read it. This is from a shooter and a buddy in the kill zone. So a shooter is somebody with a license to kill, and a buddy is somebody who goes out with them at night to help them with the shooting. As I said, badgers are nocturnal, so this happened at night. And I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read it through, as I really want you to kind of forefront this participant's viewpoint here. Now, if any of you are shooters, you'll know that there's an error on that. It's not a 0.22, it's a 0.222. I will correct that. Now, what I want to show here is that policy of killing badgers is being done by people pursuing ends other than that defined by the policy, which is to control TB. So some people that I went out with were shooting badgers to get rid of a nuisance species because they were scratching up a golf course. Some people were killing for money, as additional source of money, and some people were killing for fun. Many of the people I met were worked as pest control or were kind of very active shooters, and so they were killing because it was for the kind of thrill of killing a new quarry here, killing badgers. Now, these motivations, as you can see on the left, are not kind of coherent. Instead, they work together in a productive alliance to meet the required shooting capacity of 70%. So the policy has enabled these motivations to be put into practice and is reliant on them to kill enough badgers for the policy to be deemed effective and a success. And so these motivations are enacted by policy and then in turn generate the policy in this looping mechanism. Now, this can perhaps be a very good sign of policy, and a good policy is often one that is able to bring together different motivations to achieve its aims. Take COVID vaccination. Some people are getting vaccinated to protect themselves, others are to protect others, and some are getting vaccinated to be able to go on holiday. So a good policy can be said to be one that is able to tie together these different motivations, but there's other questions to ask here. There's practical questions on how do these motivations impact on the act of killing badgers. A couple of farmers have been found to have dead badgers illegally stored in their freezers with the aim of submitting these to the cull to then get money from these dead badgers and to make sure that the cull is a success. Now, this isn't common, but this is a consequence of having a policy that enacts these different motivations. There's also kind of questions we can ask around, should a policy be based on people killing badgers for fun? That's not something I'm going to attempt to answer, but it's just something that these sort of mixed motivations bring up. Now, badger culling, from my experience, is very stressful and very exciting in the field. I'm just going to give you another moment to read. Oh, sorry, here's the dead badger here. I'm just going to give you another moment to read through the extract on screen, again, taken from participant observation in the cull zone. So in the field, when killing badgers, culling, the badger culling is both searching for badgers and searching for activists. Shooters largely want to avoid meeting activists face to face, as activists will then know where they're going to be shooting and will likely patrol that land going forward, making it very difficult for shooters to access. So covertness is absolutely key to this policy. Shooters have to be covert to avoid confrontation, to avoid engagement with activists. Now, going back to my original question, what is TB? Well, what is TB here? In the acts of culling in the field, TB is backgrounded. It's vital because it underpins the licensing of culling, but it's not actively present in the field. I didn't have any occasions when out shooting with people shooting badgers where TB was raised in and of itself. Instead, the emotions and the practices of searching and shooting for badgers, and the thrill, the chase, and searching and avoiding anti-cull activists, these are the things that are foregrounded, and these are the things that badger culling strongly links to. And I found the same for anti-cull activists. I'll just let you read some of those quotes on screen. So anti-cull activists and anti-cull protesters, they are working to try and stop the cull in various different ways. Some are undertaking set surveys, so they know where badger sets are, and they can then go and do set sits. They can sit by the sets to protect them from shooting. Some groups are finding bait like this here and digging it up to remove it so that badgers don't eat the peanuts, stay there and then get shot. Others are trashing cages like this. This is a cage that is used to trap and then shoot a badger in. And you can see that it's been jumped on to trash it. Some are doing this. And some are doing graffiti of the local area, and others are undertaking very direct action against farmers and landowners, people involved in the cull, to try and get them to pull out of the cull so that they don't meet the necessary requirements to get a license. I met quite a few farmers and people involved in the cull who had experienced quite extreme, in my eyes, intimidation, such as having rape alarms thrown into their cattle sheds, having some of their farmyards trashed, to try and from the anti-cull activist perspective, they were doing this to try and get them to pull out of the cull. Now, what really surprised me was that to many farmers I spoke with who had experienced kind of extreme activism such as this, told me that it was really unpleasant at the time, as you can imagine, but it also made them more determined to continue with the cull. And the anti-cull graffiti in the local villages like this here was referred to by some as something that brought us locals together to fight against. So in some sense, the activism encouraged the coalition of landowners and therefore helped to sustain the badger culling policy in that loop. So there's a very weird cycle here going on about how culling is maintained. I would say the same thing was true for activists as it was for shooters, that TB wasn't present. TB was hardly raised. Rather, it was about the unethical slaughter of badgers. So what I wanted to show here is that badger culling policy provides possibilities about what TB is and how it's undertaken. And it's also strongly bound up with these relations between those supporting and those opposing the cull. Now, I'm just going to move on to talk about a citizen science study that we did, where people who had different views were in work together rather than we're in contestation like in the cull zone. Here in the Badger Found Dead study, we did a citizen science study to work out the prevalence, so that's kind of roughly the amount of TB in badgers in the Edge area, so in 6 counties which are listed on the screen. We collected and analysed about 100 dead badgers in these counties, and and different people took part with a stake in TB to help get this knowledge. So here, the study was a collective endeavour between people who had very different opinions on how to manage TB. Now, there was different engagement in different counties. Some counties were mainly farmer collectors and some were mainly wildlife groups. But this is the overall number across the 6 counties. And the academic who led the study decided to undertake it as citizen science to ensure that enough badges were collected to calculate a prevalence rate that was roughly geographically representative and hopefully statistically significant. So I worked on the study to recruit collectors. I also undertook interviews with them. I did participant observation in the labs, and I presented the results to collectors. The results of the study, the preliminary results of the study and the scientific uncertainties in it were regularly open and shared with all people involved, and with quite a lot of advice about how to use that data. And the findings at a high level was that disease prevalence, so that's the amount of the disease in badgers in those counties, was 8.3% in all overall, with prevalence ranging between 4 to 15% dependent on the counties. There was a wide range of spoligotypes, so that's the genetic types of the bacteria. There was a wider range of spoligotypes, found in badgers than in cattle. And so we, as the kind of academic team, interpreted these results to mean that there was little evidence, with the exception of Cheshire, to link the expansion of the TB epidemic in cattle to widespread badger infection. Now, the doing of citizen science here enabled us to get vital knowledge that would otherwise have been impossible to do. The scientific process could only be done because we're doing it as citizen science. And we think it was effective because people had a stake in it. So people wanted to contribute, they wanted this knowledge. The scientific process during the time of collection was regarded quite highly by most people involved. The academics were very keen to form personal relationships with people and communicated the uncertainties to a great extent. The people collecting badges were informed how uncertainty in the study results could be reduced. And so they were kind of brought in to have a stake in trying to reduce uncertainty in the science. For example, we communicated quite a lot to them that we only wanted fresh, minimally squished badgers to try and reduce cross-contamination. And they therefore had a stake in trying to reduce uncertainty and also understand uncertainty. So the study increased some people's comprehension of science in the making, so how science is done and how uncertainties are managed, and therefore increased their confidence in the limitations of the study. But this was really only whilst the study was being undertaken. Whilst the study was being undertaken, the citizen science helped progressive conversations between different views. But once the findings were published, divisions immediately arose, and these were largely based on long-standing views on how people wanted TB in badgers to be managed. So I'm just going to show you a quote from someone collecting badgers who presumed that infection rates would be low in the area. So this person was taking part in the study because they thought that prevalence rates would be low and that this would encourage vaccination in the area, and that it would basically show anyone who wanted to cull that there was no reason to cull, and that the data would be reliable, not questionable, and therefore their arguments would stand. And this was not just the view of this was also the view of people who were taking part because they wanted to create evidence to have a cull. or to know if the cull would be effective. So this kind of rhetoric was held by lots of different people involved. So on one occasion, we presented findings in a village hall to interested parties. And after we presented the findings, one farmer who was expecting a high prevalence of infection because he had been going down with TB a lot, he had submitted a lot of badgers, and he thought it was due to he had infected badgers around his farm. He drew on the uncertainties that we had shared throughout the study to tell the room that results were meaningless at both the farm and the county scale, as the process was not sensitive enough to detect all infected badgers, and therefore we had missed a lot. So what was really interesting was that the uncertainties that we had shared helped people to form a group until the results were released. Then when the results were released, the results couldn't overcome the long-standing contestation. So the doing of citizen science brought groups together, but was unable to hold them together, as findings were interpreted as part of long-standing views and couldn't overcome that. So the results were interpreted to fit in some cases, not in all, motivations for taking part, which were mainly to expand culling, to expand vaccination, or to stop culling. Now, on reflection, there may have been an increased chance of holding people together if we had done more face-to-face engagement, or we had set in advance, like, if the result is this, then this means that we should, do we all agree that this means that we should proceed with vaccination or proceed with culling? So if we had set in advance kind of the boundaries of, this means that for Derbyshire, say, we will continue with culling or we will do vaccination, then that might have helped people to come together a bit better. So I think the interesting thing here is that citizen science is sometimes framed as a great way to overcome contestation. It wasn't in this case. It did help, but it enabled conversation rather than brought people together in the long term. It was unable to do that. So why does this matter? Well, I hope I've been able to show you that the disease management practices manage disease and create disease. That TB is in the making because it's made through these disease management practices. My research challenges the widespread conceptualization of the disease in that it's fixed. I don't think it is fixed. I think it's constantly in the making, and therefore this gives us the opportunity, as I said earlier, to shift some disease management practices to therefore shift what the disease is, so that we can perhaps make less painful versions of the disease, both for the farmers who, as I said earlier, might be really struggling with the hopelessness of TB, and also for people who are kind of very against some of these policies that are being implemented. There's also the opportunity to shift the control rhetoric around TB and badger culling, because this is not obvious in the field. This rhetoric around TB and badger culling is not present in the field. There's also possibilities around citizen science to bring people together. As I said, we could have done this better, and I really think that there's greater opportunity to use citizen science in TB so that we can find the commonalities of the aims of what people want to know. I've also shown how doing an ethnography can confront how controversy arises and can challenge long-term presumptions around the disease. I think doing a multi-sited and a multi-sided ethnography can be really useful for other rural controversies, like rewilding, like fox hunting, to take advantage of their generativity, of what could be done differently in the future. And finally, that lessons can be applied from the management of TB to inform the management and conceptualization of other zoonotic disease. There's lots of learnings from TB that are not unique to TB that can be shared across different diseases, and so there's learnings here for other diseases too. Now I'm just going to finish just by quickly going through. I've finished this research now. I've finished the actual doing of the research, and I'm now in the stage of writing up and communicating. I've been lucky enough to get a 2-year grant to continue my work, and I'm going to be spending much of this time writing articles about my methods and my findings and many of the practices I did research on. I'm also aiming to communicate this more to some of the stakeholders that I worked with, so that we can really see what are some of these alternative futures and what can we do about it. Now, I had planned to share my research with lots of TB advisory groups through the last 2 winters, but obviously COVID put a spanner in the works there. I'm also, so policy has recently changed to move, in many cases, from badger culling to badger vaccination. And so lots of, some cull zones which have been doing culling for the last, multiple years are now moving into badger vaccination. And there's quite a lot of difficulty here about getting farmers to do vaccination, which is the aim of the policy. So I'm going to be doing some research with farmers in cull zones, in ex-cull zones, some farmers who are doing vaccination and some farmers who aren't doing vaccination, to find out about the barriers and enablers to their involvement, with the aim that this might be able to help the new badger vaccination policy in these different areas. And finally, as I said before, there's quite a lot of researchers doing, there's quite a lot of social scientists doing work on TB. And I'm going to try and work across some different academic networks to kind of come up with a research agenda for how we can kind of more productively work together to answer some of the big questions that underpin TB and other zoonotic diseases. So thanks very much for listening. I'm really happy to take any questions.